Welcome everyone to the International Literature Festival. Welcome to this new location we have, the Silent Green Kulturquartier, and welcome to a night or 1.5 hours or 75 minutes with the wonderful Eileen Myles. Please give her a huge welcome. We're going to talk about sex, and we're going to talk about the Chelsea Girls, and we're going to talk about the great life of Eileen Myles, of course. First, I'm going to introduce her a little bit for the few people, and there I fucked it up. We're doing this again. I will introduce them with a little biographical detour or a journey. Eileen Myles was born in Cambridge and went to school in Boston, then moved to New York to become a poet or a writer, already having been one in a way. They are a public talker, a novelist, a performance artist, an art journalist, and mostly known for the poems, of course. They went to New York in 1974 and quickly went to a place that is called the St. Mark's Church or St. Mark's Poetry Project from 75 to 77. You were there getting an education, and then from 84 to 86 were the art director of that project. Tell me a little bit, before I go on in your biography, about the St. Mark's Church / St. Mark's Poetry Project.
It's a very old building on the site of an even older building. It's just like, it's in the East Village. It's sort of catty corner. It's really special because the neighborhood has changed so much, and that church just doesn't change. And I think in the 60s they started arts projects in there, like a poetry project, a film project, and a theater project. And it just has had, but even before that, like, it's always been like this sort of immigrant art church. And so Isadora Duncan danced there, and Auden, W.H. Auden went to church there, and you know, and Patti Smith got started there, and Sam Shepard got started. So it's been a place that's had, and there's been a whole activist tradition coming out of it too. And so it's always been like a really special place in New York history. And when I got to New York, one could take free writing workshops with like your kind of poetry heroes and stuff, and you just come in on Friday night with a beer can and sit down and start doing it. And it was like a real entree into a community. So it was very kind of magical, and you know, a small but like really vibrant room.
You described that in your book and in great detail. Also, your life in New York, switching back and forth. But we're going to, before we go to Chelsea Girls, a little bit more maybe about you. I already talked about the performances. There's a performance piece, I think, in the 2000s called The Collection of Silence, which was much later, and I think you started to perform your poems. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about how the performance came into your poet's life?
I think for me, the biggest thing about performance is drugs and alcohol, because like I always loved drugs and alcohol, but and writing and doing, you know, like I did a lot of like theater projects with friends in the East Village and so on. But they would often be these spectacular events with months of preparation and one night of performance, you know. But when I actually, in the 80s, I stopped drinking and drugging because I come from a long line of people who die of it, basically. And I just started to notice that I had a different feeling when I would I had more energy when I gave readings than just sort of standing there. So I started experimenting with memorizing texts and then improvising with texts, and then, which actually led me to running for president in 1992, because it seemed like the ultimate performance, you know.
So that is tackled. Maybe I can list a couple of the publications where they published in the Art Forum, Book Forum, the Village Voice, the New York Times, the New Yorker, Harper's, and Vice magazine. Also, they got a Guggenheim Fellowship in nonfiction. You were awarded for 4 Lambda Book Awards, I think. With 4 Lambda Book Awards, you got a Poetry Award for the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. Were from 2002 to 2007 a professor in creative writing at the University of California. And have I forgotten anything so far?
That's that's fine.
That's fine. Okay, you can read it all on eileenmyles.com. A couple of works, 20 works in total so far. We're celebrating the 25th anniversary of this book, Chelsea Girls. A fresh young voice from the plains. We're going to hear about this, one of the first ones. Bread and Water, 1969. Not Me, Chelsea Girls in 1994. The New Fuck You, Adventures in Lesbian Reading. School of Fish, Cool for You. Skies, On My Way. Sorry Tree, The Importance of Being Iceland. Inferno, Pencil Poems, Snowflake, Different Streets, Afterglow, and Evolution are the ones that are listed. What is missing?
I don't know, but I was just thinking you just did that because you really liked reading a list of titles, right?
I did.
It was like, it's a kind of a good list. Yeah.
Great joy.
Thank you.
I just said it, 25 years ago this book was published. Now we're talking about it again. Before we go into the structure of the book or what you were writing and how you're writing about your time back then, or the time of Eileen Myles, what are your memories about writing it, about writing Chelsea Girls?
I guess I was learning how to write prose, you know? I mean, I think I wanted, when I was in college, I took, you know, writing classes, and I was much more, I was secretly writing poems, but then I was too embarrassed in class to read the poems in class, and so I would write stories just to bring into class. But I think my ambition was actually to write novels, but I had no idea how to write a novel. And it seemed like the biggest problem with writing a long piece of prose was that you had to somehow figure out how to keep being the same person every day when you sat down at the typewriter or the whatever, the word processor, the computer over the years, or writing by hand too. And so I think that it took me 14 years to write this, you know? And I think the first, like the oldest story in it, I wrote like in 1981, and it was like, it really came out of my girlfriend and I wanting to make films. And it was like in the 80s, and all these dudes were making Super 8 films in the neighborhood, and we wanted to make them, but we were kind of just too fucked up. And so we would spend a lot of time drinking and talking about the movies that we wanted to make. And so there actually is a chapter in here called Bread and Water where I described that moment, and I even describe us. We actually made like a 3-minute movie at some point, but we had such a bad camera that we didn't even know when the camera was on or not. And we didn't develop, like, I don't think we developed the film for years. But I wrote my first, that story. I wrote that story because I thought, well, if I can't make a film, I'm just going to write a story that feels like a film. And I thought, I'm just going to record my life, our life, as we live it, and just see where the camera takes us. And so that gave me a way to write a story, and that felt good. And often when I feel like when I do something, if I can do something once, then I can do it again, you know? And so then it was like it just became more, each story became a little more faceted and a little more, I was a little more confident, like, oh, I can write a 10-page story, maybe I can write a 20-page story, and then I could write a bunch of those, and then that could be a novel. But it was just a very slow development, mainly because I wanted to write one, and I didn't believe at the same time that I could write one. So I was I very much learned to write a novel while writing this novel.
You call it a novel, some call it autobiographical, then others say Eileen Myles created a character that reappears called Eileen Myles. Is this something that you want to talk about, or is this something that, you know, the uncertainty about, is this about you, are these stories yours, or should we assume that maybe they're a heightened form of a certain kind of reality, or they're not? You know what I mean? Am I supposed to take this as something that happened to you, or do you not want to answer that question?
Yeah, like that's someplace in between, because I feel like it's sort of like, in a way, it's a bunch of experiences that wind up being sort of titled Eileen Myles. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's something very anonymous about having a life, right? And it's just like, I didn't pick my name. And in a way, I mean, I often have made jokes about the fact that I use my own experience because it's just available to me. So why should I make up a character when I have all this information and I can go deeply into, I don't have to research. You know, I know this stuff, but using that doesn't mean that it's reliable or that I'm reliable. You know, and I think, and to me, I think it becomes fiction both when you just start writing, but also when you rearrange and reorganize. And also, finally, I think I have no real desire to write a book about Eileen Myles. It's just where I began, you know. And I mean, I think that the sound of one's own name is a weird thing that we have to get used to. I mean, I was hanging out with a friend the other day who has a baby, and what was their name? And I just thought, I wonder if they know their name yet. You know, and you don't know your name for a long time. It's just this sound that you hear around you. So I feel like every piece of an identity is very untrustworthy and not even exactly yours for a very long time. And I think a lot of experiences, a lot of queer experiences, a lot of female experiences are both generic, impersonal, unarticulated, and even on many levels inexperienced. You know, I mean, I think things happen to you that you're watching happen, and that isn't just in childhood. I think it's in adulthood. I think a lot of experience is traumatic. And so it could have happened to somebody else. It just happened to happen to me or somebody like me.
The form is also very interesting. It's very fragmented in that sense. You just told me, I didn't know that it took you 14 years to write it, that it's small stories, 28 of them, but arranged in the sense that you're queering a sense of story or biography, because it starts somewhere, then you go back to a childhood, could be yours, could be someone else's, and then you have an epilogue, but then you have the last chapter and so on and so forth. Was it always clear to you that you wanted to fragment that novel in so many pieces of a puzzle that we then put together or don't put together?
Well, I mean, I think it was always a question in real time about how these pieces would fit together, because it was like each year would give, you know, like 1989, I found myself thinking about 1969, and that I went to Woodstock, and so I was like, oh, I can write about that. And then I wrote that, and then a year passed. So I really had no strong sense of how these stories would fit together as a novel, though at the end, even the last few years of it, I thought about what wasn't there. Like I had been gang raped when I was 18, and I thought, how can I write a book? I mean, one thing I can't help always saying this, but like when I was, probably the first art experience in a way for me, or besides television, was like art films. You know, I lived near Harvard Square, and so I had an art place I could go to. Like I lived in a town called Arlington, which was like 20 minutes away from Harvard Square, a bus ride away. So right away there were kids who went to Harvard Square. We were those kids, you know. And you would go to see films, experimental films, international films. And so I would see Truffaut movies, and there was that, like a film called 400 Blows that was about a child, and then it was Bed and Board, and it was a young man, and it was just like all the evolution of a male character over time. And I remember just thinking, why is there no female? His name was Antoine Daniel, and I was like, why is there no female Antoine Daniel? So I think right from the get-go, I think I thought that I wanted to make something that would tell their story, you know, over time and do that kind of thing. And so by the time I got closer to the end of completing a book, I thought, well, how can I write such an object, such a storytelling thing? If I was gang raped, then many women were, that this is a common experience, and that so I wrote that story to go in the book. And I think there were a few things like that at the end, but certainly that one that seemed, the book would be a lie if that wasn't in there, because it explained many other things too, I thought, you know.
Can you talk about the title, Chelsea Girls? Why did you name it Chelsea Girls?
You know, I think my girlfriend's mother said, that's the title. Because I published that story like in some anthology or something, and it seemed like it was the most complete or the most evolved or the most complicated story in the book. And I think I think she just knew that there was such a story, and she announced, because there's the story I mentioned, Bread and Water, was the original title. And I think there's I don't know if you've seen, there's this little Hanneman books that are about this big. They're these little art books that came out in the 80s, and the first version of this book was in that, and the book was called Bread and Water. And a friend of mine was just really upset that I was calling the book Chelsea Girls, because he was like, bread and water, that's what it really is. Because, you know, so much of it is about being young and poor and female and broke, you know, just kind of a certain kind of punky existence in a way that felt Bread and Water would have underlined that drama, whereas Chelsea Girls went to culture and then kind of winked at Warhol, you know, which is, you know, was the reference too. But that won out, and I probably, even in my desires to get the book published, I thought people would like that title, you know, and then people like whatever they want to like, whatever.
I find it quite interesting because, as you mentioned, it's a very famous, or the first commercially successful film by Warhol, Chelsea Girls, and I think the phenomenon at that time was there's not one film but two projections, so you would never see the same film. So I thought kind of I was waiting until the end until you finally mention Andy Warhol, but you're not, which I found quite interesting because in the end you are in the book, yes, you are in the Chelsea Hotel, but your book has kind of like a structure, like an experimental film from that time. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that time. A couple of people are advertising this book as if you name dropped a lot. I mean, we have a beautiful picture of Robert Mapplethorpe on the cover, Patti Smith and Allen Ginsberg and him. Are footnotes in your book. This is not about the people that you surround yourself with, and I wonder if that was always a deliberate decision. You know, some people, I mean, might have expected, you know, to tell us the secrets of these famous people you hung out of. But no, this is a book about Eileen Myles, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I feel like to not use those names would have been a deception because it was such a part of the landscape of New York at that time. You know, it's sort of like if you went to a party and Andy Warhol was there, you felt like you were at the party. You were at the right, you know. I mean, and Allen Ginsberg was like that too. He lived in my neighborhood, and I knew Allen, but it was like it kind of defined the neighborhood. It defined the time. It defined, you know, if you went to a, you know, it's just like Allen's attention for your work was very. You know, like exciting, of course, you know, and so it's just like they had an effect on us, but it's still, you know, I just, because I have another book, Inferno, which is about becoming a poet, and again, people are in there, Patti Smith's in there and stuff, and it's sort of like, it was just part of the landscape. And it seemed like if I was going to start dwelling on who they were or what they said, then you were like playing to the crowd and making it be like a, you know, like a pleasing book. And I never was interested in doing that. I just wanted to show, because you know, but truly, I suppose part of the thing about living in New York, I mean, before I even lived in New York, was a little bit of the thrill that those people lived there and that you were living in the same place, and that, you know, that, because I think in a way the point of a city is the closeness of culture. That it's intimate, and it's the thing that you really gain and lose when you first come is in a way your awe, you know, because it's just like you can't be weird around famous people, you know, you just have to either not notice them or just be like, hey, you know, and even among your friends when you're just, you know, to understand that the people near you who are making art are the people, not, you know, like that actually your own generation, your own kind of cohorts are actually more important than Allen Ginsberg or whoever, you know, and it's sort of like the closest the real cultural life. And those people know that too, you know, there's a kind of the connection is the point. And so to make it be about them would be to be much more capitalist, I think. You know, it's like, here's the, you know, so I kind of hate when my work gets written about, like, it's like swinging, you know, when it's all about New York, it's all about these people and stuff. It just seems like a real, because it's all about the writing, it's all about becoming, I wanted to show, I just thought there was just a female queer poet reality that I've never seen in print before. I thought, so many times when I was living my life, when I was younger, I was thinking, nobody knows we exist. Nobody knows we live like this, you know? And that was what I wanted to, you know, say, not even who we are, but how we are, you know, and what we are and where we are, you know? So it wasn't about them, it was about us.
Instead, the real protagonists are the Chris's, the Judys, the Robins, the many ex-girlfriends that come and go and reappear and sometimes don't, and some ex-boyfriends as well. Did you talk about them before you published it? What kind of alliance did you have to them to, well, let's just say, did Eileen Myles ask the people who are in the book about, you know, publishing the private stories that were often determined by drug use, as you said, alcohol, wild partying, but also sometimes violence and a lot of fun stories as well?
I mean, I never asked anybody, but I knew from my publisher what was legal and what was not legal. You know, like you can say anybody's name in relationship to going to the movies with them, but if you're gonna do drugs with them or have sex with them, you couldn't use their name because you could be sued. You know, so basically, I changed lots of names and didn't include some experiences and so on. So I just like, I mean, I obeyed my own sense of sensitivity or ethics even to some extent. But nonetheless, you always piss people off. You know, there's no way that that's not what's happening. But interestingly, the Chris character, and again, that's not her name, was my girlfriend and is in here. And she, when I was kind of trying to woo her, we would just sit up late and talk and take drugs and do amphetamines and drink beers and just tell about our families and everything like that. And I think that she made me feel interesting. Like, she was like, you should really write these stories. And she really, in so many ways, she was the muse of the book. I mean, in so many ways, she told me to write the book. Though, of course, as far as I know, she hates my guts, I think she read some of the stories early on, but I think when the book came out, I think that she seemed fine about it, and then I think somebody else said to her, "Doesn't that piss you off?" And she was like, "Yeah." And then she was mad, and I don't think as far as I know, she never stopped being mad. But we're not close, and I don't know her today.
How much? You're also a political activist, if I may say so. Would you consider yourself a political activist?
Yeah, I mean, kind of I think I wouldn't claim it so much, but I think it's true. I've done activist things, but I feel like I'm more an activist with my mouth. I feel like I talk about things, I tweet about things, I write about things, and things that are important to me, I put in my work in a variety of ways.
But if I call you a political activist, you're not complaining?
No, I'm not complaining.
Okay, no. Good. What I'm trying to get at is the description, the beautiful description, the raw description of lesbian love, lesbian sex, lesbian identity in this book. I must imagine that, this has never been described in the sense that you described it, and I was wondering if that was sort of like a political act to just say, I want to write it as I experiences, as we experiences. We need these kind of stories and depictions that are also not sugar-coated, but that are raw in a sexual and personal and human way.
Well, a lot of the writing of the book took place like at the height of the AIDS crisis, and so it was just really commonplace among my friends and culture to be pro-sex and to write about sex. It was almost like you had to do it, and it's not easy to write about sex or to write well about sex, and so there was just a challenge in the air, and then, and then I think it's just like stuff comes to you. It's just like I feel like I've never written a sex scene deliberately. It would be just that I was writing about, how I felt, about this relationship or how hurt I've never written about a relationship generally right in it. It's always like a little time has to pass, and then it's just like the whole story kind of floods up, and you want to write about it. And if there's a distinct graphic sex scene, it just goes right into the story, So I think it's sort of, I feel like I write in a really visual way. Like I kind of imagine the place, and then the place kind of tells the story. So the fact that there's a big pussy by a window in my apartment, was just part of the scenery of that winter. And
we already talked a little bit about New York at that time that you described in a way that I think makes people melancholic who've lived in this town, but also who've lived in Berlin in a different time where artists did struggle as well as they do now, but had more space. There was space available. There was poverty, but you could have a loft, even if it was in a dangerous area, but it was available. There's an availability of space for people, for artists, also to have a bohemian lifestyle, which now seems more and more impossible, or already is impossible. The chapter you're about to read, I think, is set in one of those lofts.
Yeah.
But maybe you could, we could talk briefly about, without getting too nostalgic, about the New York that you've lived through in the 70s, 80s, 90s, thousands, and that you still live in 2019. How much it has changed, and how much it maybe has changed your artist's personality or not.
Yeah. Real estate is just, it was like, you don't know how much real estate affects you until it changes, I guess. It seemed like people without money had large spaces, which meant, it's so funny when I think about the art world now and the poetry world. People get more education now because I think educational institutions hold time in the way cities used to and real estate used to, And so I think the term mentorship, it still makes me kind of like, I feel like, what about friends? What about just hanging out with older people or younger people? But I think even that kind of sneering comes out of the experience of having lived in, you know, in an urban center where people without money had large spaces. And so they would invite all their friends, and so some of their friends were dancers, and some of their friends were junkies, and some of their friends were poets, and some, you know, you would just wind up in the same physical space. And there was more cross-generational hanging out too. You know, I think it just somehow seemed very organic, whereas I think now the institutionality of the art world means that, you know, one is a mentor and then one is a student, and you know, some people hang out with students and some, you know, but it's like, it's much more, like I think when I first started dating somebody in the aughts, and I realized that at her party I was the only older person. I was older than her, and then everybody in the room was their friend, and they didn't have any other older friends, you know, and it was just the way it was, and it started to be that way, you know, and that was something that affected me, and I don't know, it's just, then I realized I have to be more deliberate about even courting my own friends and making sure, like if I'm dating a younger woman, I have to make sure that I'm hanging out with my older friends too, you know, because it's sort of like you start to, like, social architecture affects you really viscerally. You know, it's sort of like the feeling of agedness comes from only hanging out with people you're an elder. You know, it's like, I'm not an elder, I'm Eileen, but I happen to be Eileen in my 60s, you know? So it's sort of like, I think that the way it's changed, both for me and my work and in my life, means that I have to make something be conscious that it didn't used to be conscious. You know, because it's sort of like you just get pushed into forms that are evolving in ways that you don't even notice until time passes. I remember going to a party years ago and somebody saying, "You're the only person I know in their 40s. You know, you're the only person in their 40s that goes out. You know, and now that person doesn't go out anymore. You know, and so it was just this thing that happened around you. You know, and the same way that, you know, people getting sick happened around you, and then it stopped happening, and then the space closed up, and then you became some of the people who remembered that, and some of the people who didn't remember that, and then you were in a new shaped community, you know.
You already mentioned you were running for president in 1992 on the peak of the AIDS crisis. How much did that actually also affect the New York art scene? Was that the turning point for everything?
I mean, you mean AIDS?
Yeah, for you and for the social structure or fabric that you just described.
Well, it was huge. There's no denying it. And it was in a network of so many other political actions by some of the same. You know, it's sort of like in the States, they did this thing they closed a lot of mental hospitals and did a lot of outpatienting, which meant that a lot of people became homeless. You know, the streets, suddenly New York became hugely flooded with homeless people who were living in the subway, and, you know, and real estate was changing. So all these things happened at once, in a way, you know, and so there's no, but you know, it's just, there's no way of, there's almost no way of honoring the way it actually felt. But you know, like, but weirdly, AIDS made everybody just have so much sex. You know, that was just everybody's pushback against it, was that we're alive and we're not going to let this change us or change how we are or who we are or what we do, you know? And so it was a really hot time in this crazy way too, which is so strange. You would go to a funeral, then you would go and have sex with somebody, you know? It's just, it was sort of great, you know, and horrible. You know, it's weird now. I have friends now. I mean, a wonderful writer, Kevin Killian, just died last month, who was a wonderful fiction writer, and he's my age, and it's so weird for somebody who's like my age to die. It seemed like death was about being young, and it was shocking, and now it's like, quote, normal death, you know, and it just seems really weird, but even weirdly a little grateful, like we got to be old enough to die, you know, because so many people died so young and so unjustly.
You'll talk about the first publication you ever have in the excerpt that you're about to read. Maybe you can set it up by telling us a little bit what that looked like as a poet, a poor poet back then in New York in the 70s, with the idea in your head that you actually want to publish your poems. What kind of, well, publishing world you can't really say maybe, or what kind of ideas, what did you have to do to get your stuff out there?
Well, you know, all my publishers were friends. I mean, everybody who published my books until I don't know, until Chelsea Girls basically were friends, you know, and that's the way it happened. So there was a press called Power Mad, and it was my friend Barbara who had the loft, and they also had a, like Barbara had a little family money, and so she bought typographic, or, you know, whatever it is that you typeset things on. She bought the machinery, and then what it meant, and then she had a van, and so they had several businesses. The van drove bands around. The typographic equipment gave people jobs, and they did kind of freelance typesetting out of the loft, and so it was just like a kind of a communal thing. And so and then they had a press, and so they published various of their friends, and so they did my book. So it was just like everything seemed like an outgrowth of everything else. My book before that was mimeographed. It was just run off, like St. Mark's Church was a church as well as being you know, an art space. And so they, you know, at that time, we had Xerox machines then, but it was still like printing was mimeographed. And so you would, you know, churn these things out on these machines. And so my first book was on mimeograph, and you would staple it. Like we would have collating parties, which were really cool. Like you would just, everybody would just go to somebody's house, and you would have these long tables, and the poetry magazine would be all laid out on the table, and you'd just be drinking beers and taking amphetamines and putting the book together, and at the end everybody would get 3 books, and then you would go on to whatever you did next that night. So it was just always in a very, it was just like, I mean, often I would be, it's why I say the thing about near and close, because I still would be thinking that those people out there should be publishing my book, but generally what happened was these people in here published it, you know, and then what happened is that these people in here became bigger, you know, like Chris Kraus was published my first big book of poetry, not me, you know, and Chris was my friend that I hung out with at the Poetry Project, and now people know who Chris Kraus is. But so it's just like people's lives changed, but the relationship was just always the same thing for a very long time.
Do you want to read?
Sure. Now I feel like I'm doing something really scary. So I know, I feel like I'm betraying the sex word. There's not a lot of sex in this book, but I think the feeling is sexual. Oh yeah, I just grabbed your book. You don't mind.
It's an honor.
Yeah, so it's called February 13th, 1982. And it's about a book party. Time passes. Is that right? Where does it? Okay, I think that's it. It's a weird relation of face to, you know, you all perform, you know what this is like. Time passes, that's for sure. Actually, I've got to say, this is very strange. Did you see the Lily Tomlin movie called, what was it called? Grandma or something?
Yeah.
They put those 2 lines, they put it at the front of the movie. Kind of amazing, right? It was like completely by accident in a way, but like the movie is about Lily Tomlin is like a dyke grandmother who's getting who's getting an abortion for her granddaughter, and she has no money, so she decides to sell all her first editions of poetry magazines. So I get this weird phone call a few summers ago from these producers saying, "Do you mind if she's selling your books?" I was like, "No, okay, go ahead." So then she chats. My books show up in the movie, and then they decided to put a line from this book, completely unrelated, at the front of the movie. So then it became, and then Variety said that the movie was based on me. And I was like, A, I'm not a grandmother. B, it has nothing to do with me. It just, you know. Time passes, that's for sure. It's the nightmare of having what you want that I'm interested in today. I had a book party 5 years ago. It took place in New York, where I live, and it was the beginning of the end for me. I'm a very different person today. Bill's coming over to build shelves in the kitchen. Things have a slow progression, kind of a pleasant listiness. A big part of my list is the past. I went over to Rose's to plan the book party. Power Mad Press, which was Barbara, was publishing my book. Barbara lived with Rose in a loft, and that's where we were going to have the party. Rose is an astrologer. She pointed to February 13th on her calendar. It's got to be this date, she said. Absolutely. But why, I asked. A lot of things will converge for you on this date. Your Mars, a lot of your aspects. I don't know how to explain it, but this is you. Maybe you don't want your party to be such an intense experience. It could be a lot quieter. It depends on what you want. Rose was like a lawyer or a salesman. You never knew if she was making this stuff up, if she really had her finger on the pulsation of the orbs. And if she did, I mean, if she really had the power, was she on my side? I watched the way she played with her cats. What if she was just very powerful and intuitive, but to her, we were all just cats? It was an interesting place to be, and I decided to go with her suggestion. I made a very nice white on black invitation. I sent it to significant people. Mostly the party was publicized by word of mouth. I bought some cocaine. I was a very down and out person, glamorous but down and out. Sort of a beer drinker, really. The kind of person who always had diet pills in her faded jean pockets. My main concern really was that I didn't get so drunk that I fell down or turned it into an embarrassing night in some way. It was an early evening event. I had slept with this girl who was a musician and who I was currently in love with. She left around noon, left me to my cigarettes and a nice foggy musing upon my pink floral sheets and the birds outside the window and the slender branches of the trees. I have an old cemetery outside my window, and I felt like Keats in the 80s or something. I could feel the nervousness rising in me like some kind of strange spring, inside and out. The winter had a way to go, but there's always days in February when you forget that. For me to put down $100 for cocaine was something, but all in service of this wonderful, amazing day, the long-awaited book, and of course, my new life. I suppose I had the typical horror of what if nobody shows up. I went over to the loft relatively early, and I know I was full of the deep calm of one who is in a total panic. I smoked significant cigarettes. The whole thing wasn't very professional. We didn't even know we could sell books. We had maybe 20 available copies. The rest of the books were there in the loft, but a couple of things were missing from them. One was the name of the photographer who did the photos front and back. Irene Young would be pissed if she didn't get credit, so we had a stamp made and dutifully stamped her name in red ink on the credit page. The other thing missing from the book was a whole stanza, the last stanza of a poem called New York. Here's the stanza. Then, entering the subway, pushing through the crowds at 34th, I saw a baby sucking desperately on its bottle, tears streaming down its dark face. As it sat in its carriage, it stopped me. I turned to examine some flowers for sale, cloth on silky green leaves, mounted on a comb. I plucked up a black one, a black rose, paid the guy $1. I love it. I'm softly fingering the petals on the subway home. It is so artificial, so dark and so beautiful. I thought, it is so artificial, so dark and so beautiful, referred to New York. Now it strikes me that I was talking about my life. Line 4 should read, fat, dark face, not tat. So what happened once the party got going was that as people wanted copies of the book, I had to go into the back room and stamp Irene Young in the final stanza of New York into each copy. My book was called A Fresh Young Voice from the Plains. I had always figured if I had a book, I would want my face all over it. The experience was like television. Every book hanging off the end of someone's hand was like another tiny monitor. As more and more people began to flow in, it meant that many more pictures of me were bobbing around the room. What a horror. Particularly in relationship to the people I didn't know. They would look down at their book and then up at me, oh, it's you. Here it was a big moment in my life, and to them it was just another party. I began to join that group. Some beer, some Coke, some people you know. I would go in the back and people would offer me some Coke, and then I would offer mine to other people. People seemed surprised that I have my own Coke. Of course, it's my party. It's a self-serving event. Allen Ginsberg asked me to sign his book. I must have stood there for 5 minutes drawing a complete blank. Hi, Allen, from one howl to another. Dear Allen, I'm glad you think I'm a poet. Love, Eileen. I'm the only woman you like, right, Allen? Only the craziest thoughts passed through my mind. Finally, he started getting embarrassed. Just sign it. Come by and write something better when you think of it. I scrawled something. I forget what it was. I was the fresh young voice from the plains. I felt so foolish signing books. Mark, you're going to kill yourself if you keep drinking the way you do. Me too, Eileen. The wrong lines kept flashing through my mind, and David's I wrote, David, I just wrote something really horrible in someone's book. People I didn't know wanted copies, and I would put them off and they'd offer money, go, come on, I'll pay for it. At the end, my pants were full of these wrinkled dollar bills. It made me feel kind of sleazy, though Barbara was the most laissez-faire publisher ever, and I'm sure she didn't give a shit. Renee was skipping around. That made it be a real party. He was talking to Ted, who was there, and Renee is actually, Renee was like a Warhol star, and he was actually in the movie Chelsea Girls, I might mention. Renee was skipping around. That made it be a real party. He was talking to Ted, who was there in his dark blue short sleeve shirt. Ted found my discomfort so amusing. How are you doing, Eileen? He put this faggy little turn on Eileen like it was a made-up name, something I'm pretending to be. It sounded right. It sure amused Renee, who kept telling me how fabulous my book party was in a way that made me wonder if this wasn't the worst party of all time. The girl musician was blowing her saxophone in the middle room with all her musician friends who were taking this party as an opportunity to play or impress each other or whatever musicians do. She seemed to think they wouldn't let her in on all their men things if they knew she was a lessee, so I could hardly get a hello out of her. My couple didn't come. I sort of moved in with this couple of poets that winter. I liked him, but I adored her, and that was all falling apart around this time. But at least they could come to my book party. I used to wear a Timex watch, and she was always asking me what time it was. I planned to give her a watch of her own at the party, but she didn't come. Suddenly, I had this extra watch. I also had guiltily bought him a purple striped tie. What was I going to do with that tie? I asked my sister to hold the stuff in her bag. She wound up going back to Boston with the watch and the tie, and eventually they came back in the mail. Then I gave Mark Breeding the watch. The tie just hung out with my other ties for a few years until I realized I didn't wear ties. Yeah, my sister from Boston came to the party, a representative of the Mileses from Boston. Unfortunately, she had just broken up with her boyfriend the night before. She thought the trip would be good for her, a distraction. People always think that until they get a few drinks in them. I wore a striped boat-neck shirt. There was a poem in my book about a dog named Scuppy who sailed the 7 seas and lived in his own private boat. I secretly knew that I was a dog who lived in a boat. The floors of my apartment had a definite slant, and the trees outside would get going in the wind, and I was always kind of staggering around, so it was a pretty natural image to grab onto. Vicky picked up on it and greeted me. Hey, Scuppy, I barked. She had the same shirt on. Mark told me he had also considered buying that shirt and would have worn it as well. I guess it was 1982, and it was an obvious shirt to have that year. Chassler, who also lived in the loft, had 2 kids from his last marriage. They were great. They were sort of the pets of the loft. These kids always had some toy that we were all playing with. Nora had a parrot on a stick. You could make the parrot bite by moving the stick. Once my sister got a little loaded, she started nipping at me with the parrot. She started aiming for the crotch a lot, and I started to get the picture that my sister was going out of control. She wasn't mixing very good, and she kept turning to me for love and affection, and then these kind of odd sexual gestures. It wasn't my day, or was it? Chris showed up. She was living in Maine with Judy. She didn't look so happy, and she looked like she had put on some weight. Somehow I think the experience of being in New York all of a sudden with its great frank energy was completely terrifying to her. People walk up and say things like, I don't mean to offend you, but you look really big. I mean, it's good. Do you do anything there? What do you do? Christine looked immediately like she wanted to cry, and eventually she did. Judy seemed like one of those nurse-type girlfriends. She had her arm around Chris, who wouldn't look up. We gotta go, Judy smiled. But thanks a lot. Don't forget brunch tomorrow. People started asking me if I was having a good time. Are you okay? The thing I couldn't look at was that book. On the front, I stand there with these crooked bangs and big bags under my eyes against the white wall of my apartment. You can see the buzzer maybe a foot and a half from my right shoulder. My face looks puffy and shapeless. Fortunately, I have kind of a big mouth, so it sort of works. My arms look weird, though. I have been doing a lot of speed in that period of time, so I'm thin, but it looks like bones with all this loose flesh tied on. The arms always look scary to me. old, folded across my ribs. There's other things that bother me about the front of the book, but look at the back. Here I am, lighting a cigarette. Here's my can of beer on my desk. That's the typewriter. Poems all over the desk. I used to know what that big one was, but I can't remember now. And here the skin that my arms were made of now makes up my face. I look like an old lady. It is really scary. I have been to 1 million book parties since I lived in New York, but mine seemed made up. I wanted to go home. There were 3 places to be in that loft. In the back room doing coke. It was actually the most comfortable back there. It was smaller and had that kind of enforced closeness that feels safe in a screwed up way. But the coke made me feel more and more like in one of those cubes of glass they used to create partitions with. Can I put on sunglasses? I wasn't sure. I'd go out into the fray, passing the musicians' area each time. They weren't playing music like you could dance to. It was like an inner experience they seemed to be involved in. I think they were all junkies. I still could hardly get a wave out of you-know-who. I leaned over and said, "We're all going someplace in a while. You want to come?" She nodded. The front room was still loosely packed with drinking, smoking people. Oh yeah, and there were all kinds of joints circulating, and for one lucky day in my life, I managed to say no to them. Since I was already completely paranoid, I couldn't imagine where I'd go if I smoked pot. People were beginning to leave. They were saying, "You want to eat with us?" Or "We've got another party," or "I've got a rehearsal," or "You know me, when you get to be my age," turns up his collar, "we go home when the getting's good." He raised his eyebrows. "Hey, Alan, want to share a cab?" The dads are leaving, I thought. This means something. Rose's girlfriend from Chicago was in town, and I was part of a troupe going to Cafe Society, one of those part-time lesbian bars. I was bringing my sister, I was bringing a musician, and I was completely depressed, but my face was frozen into a grim smile. "Eileen!" Rose screamed as we piled into a cab. "Did you have fun?" She was using the same tone she used on her cats. "Yeah, it was great, Rose. Thanks a lot." "Where are you going?" squinted the musician. I felt like tying a rope to her leg. I was so convinced she wasn't going to stick around at all. I was right. As soon as we got into the kind of glitter ball, tall, hyacinth in a vase, Italian lesbian disco environment, I could see her squirming free. I sighed. "I hate disco," she said. "You can't tell me you like this." Like? I didn't even know what that meant. "Well, no, but listen, I gotta go," she said. It was that fast. My sister seemed ready to go off. She kept putting her arm around me like, you know. I guess she was really upset about her boyfriend. I couldn't handle it. She kept saying sentimental things to me. She was really bombed, and I wanted to be nice, and I knew she was a mess, but I didn't want her touching me, especially now that the musician had left. By the time we were all in the front of the bar, the situation had reached its crisis. My sister had her arms around me and her head on my shoulder, and I absolutely couldn't handle it. We had shared a room for 17 years. If she wanted love and affection, why couldn't she have asked then? Everything was all confused. At the party, people kept saying the musician looked like a younger version of me. I thought she looked like my sister. "Look it," I said, "why don't you sit over there?" Unhinging her arms from me, she held her head down and shook it grievously. The attack. "You don't care about anyone but yourself." She was bombed. I could tell by the way she was shaping her words. "That's it. That's the whole story. You don't care about anyone but yourself. All you think about is yourself. You don't even know other people are alive. You're so selfish." It's true. She doesn't care about any of you. Think she does? She doesn't. I know her. She's a phony. A fucking phony. "Well, I hate you and I'm leaving. I'm going back tonight." She still held the parrot on a stick. She grabbed her suede jacket off the stool, and her bag was on her shoulder. "I hate you, and I never want to see you again. You are so," and she broke into sobs, "selfish." She ran out the door. I looked up at the faces that surrounded me. "She's your sister, Eileen." "Eileen, this is a very important night for you," said Rose. "It counts." Should I go? I didn't want to go. I was thinking, it's my night. It's my party. This isn't fair. I caught up with Bridget on Fifth Ave, and we jumped into a cab. I sort of tried to pet her. "Don't touch me," she shrieked. "You can't make it better now. I never want to see you again." In my apartment, I watched her call the trains and discovered she had missed her last to Boston. "I'll get a hotel. I will not stay here tonight." She didn't have far to go. She threw herself down on my bed, and I took her boots off. In a few minutes, she was out like a light. I wanted to be any place but home. It was 12:30. I was sitting on my couch. On the coffee table, I had my cigarettes, my little vial of Coke, and the red phone. And a mirror, of course. A big piece of thick, broken mirror I had found in the trash. This is the picture that should have been on the book. I could see my sister's legs and skirt. I had to keep telling myself that woman is my sister. It just seems so odd to have a passed-out woman on my bed who I know the way I know my sister. Family, great. Look at me, no one to call. My book sat on the coffee table. I felt great. I felt frozen, completely frozen in my life. It would never stop being exactly like this. I was a great poet, and I would always be alone. This is my curse. I took a couple of Valiums and fell asleep on the big brown velvet couch that always felt like a casket. I always heard a little voice yell my name just before I lost consciousness. I thought my death would be this way. I loved it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this. Did you think about doing an audiobook of that book or other books?
I already have.
You have?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Where is it? Can you buy it already?
Just go on Amazon.
Oh, cool. Great.
And so sorry. Yeah, Amazon is so fucked up, but there it is.
Your
There's my book.
book dealer.
I mean, it's the most fun thing in the world to make an audiobook. Like, you write a novel, and then you go into the studio, and you spend 3 days reading your novel out loud, you know, with this sound engineer. So you have this one-person audience that you better have a good relationship with. Because if they're not laughing, you feel like an idiot for 3 days, you know? But it's been fairly fun.
You write so much about drugs and alcohol and, well, all that accompanied you during that time. I can't help but say it's a little bit tempting to think it is great to go back to that time. What would you tell me?
I wrote all of these completely sober. And it was really fun to, like, I mean, I kind of hate the kind of literature that, like, writes all about drugs and alcohol, and then they get sober, and then you have to go through them finding themselves. And I'm like, shut up, you know? I mean, maybe I have a little bit of that in here, but a very small amount. But what was really fun was to re-enter the body of drugs and alcohol and occupy it the way it felt and remember it. And, yeah, it felt like travel in a way.
Do you miss it?
Yeah, I mean, I miss everything, you know. So yes, but not, you know, yes, and I'm glad. I mean, that's like, I'm glad that I don't have to do that again. I mean, I feel like I went as far as I possibly could without dying, you know, and so that was good enough. I think.
Going back to 1994 when the book came out, what was the reception back then?
It was good. It was like, yeah, no, I mean, I felt, you know, I got a kind of weird little review in the Times, but people liked it, and yeah, I suppose it changed a little bit of the sense of who I was and what I wrote, and you know, but at the same time, it was great. It was culty. It was very art world. It was very queer. But I think I had this thing. I mean, it took me so long to write the book that I thought it was going to, like, change my life, you know. And so there was that moment where I thought, oh my God, I'm still in the exact same life, and I'm the same person, and I'm still broke, and you know, and so that was a little. There was a deflation too. I think there's always a deflation after a book comes out too. You like, now what? That was my last book, you know, and you just go into this kind of morose thing. So it was a mix of a lot of different things. And I also didn't know how to tour a book, and because I was doing performance at the time. I think I memorized Chelsea Girls, the story, and then I memorized this other story, my father's alcoholism, and I made a performance piece, and I toured doing that. So I didn't, you know, so that's how I toured the book. I didn't really understand that you should go to bookstores and sell the book, you know. But, you know, it was what it was. It was great.
Just want to tell the audience that we are a little bit on a strict side with time because there's another event after this, so we have 15 minutes. If you have questions, we have a microphone here. You can raise your hand. I don't want to deprive you of the chance of asking Aline Myers a couple of things as well. Let's jump a little bit ahead to the present, maybe. You're involving yourself actively in politics, as you did back then. You talked about the gang rape story that you wrote in your book, and it resonated for me a lot with the Kavanaugh hearings. We talked about this beforehand. There was a piece that you did about the locker room talk, kind of like discussion that we had, and it seems like every day is a new shit show of misogynist or, well, yeah, homophobic, transphobic sort of like utterances from this government that you have now. what's your feeling at the moment? You were campaigning for Hillary Clinton, and you're involving yourself. How important is that resistance, and how tired do you get?
Huge, but I want to go back a little bit because I think the thing that's like intense, I think, to be me today and to have had that experience occur then is that I think it's like with sexual assault, it's like you're always forgetting how much it impacts on you. Because the thing that was intense, I remember when Christina, I can't remember her full name, was testifying. And
Blasey Ford.
Thank you. When she was testifying, and I remember sitting in Marfa at my kitchen table with the computer on watching it, and I just broke out into tears. It was so, I mean, I'm not a big crier either. It's a rare thing. And so it was just kind of a loss of control. And I felt like there were just so many women, I think, and men too. I mean, I think I think probably all over the globe in a certain way that you know, like that's like every time there's something like that comes out. I mean, that was I suppose the triumph of it. You know, the downside, of course, is that the fucker got the job. You know, and I think it's not over yet. But I think the fact that was out there, that it was out there in a very huge way, and you know, that I think lots of people made common cause with her and felt that, and it was, but also I mean, it made me know that this thing never ends in a way, that if you had that kind of experience, you know, you always had that kind of experience, you always had that person, and it's amazing to be in my 60s and see this happening to women in high school and women in college, and you know, and again, how utterly resistant our culture is to making that right. You know, it's nightmarish and kind of inconceivable. You know, and it just reaffirms. I mean, what I love is that a word such as patriarchy, which kind of by the 80s you just didn't hear it anymore for a long time, and now we hear it all the time. I mean, I think there's a real realization today that indeed among the many archies that we live in, we live in patriarchy, and that's something that we have to even. It's like, you know, it's like in couples counseling when they say, "Well, would you agree that you're in a relationship?" You know, that was like the first step, and I think it's still profound to agree that, you know, like that we are in fact in this thing, you know, and that's our condition, you know, and there's no denying that, and it's pretty significant. And what was the second part of the question? About politics today and resistance.
Yeah, about the fight. For me, it seems like someone used that word on a talk show once. It's outrage fatigue. I think that so many things happen in such a small time and in such a with such pace that you completely, in Germany, with different sort of political fires that we try to erase or cool down. Do you get tired of this because the entire women's marches and all that seems like 100 years ago, but like so much happens? I mean, how do you position yourself as queer, non-binary artists?
I think human bodies weren't designed for this amount of information. You know, I mean, it's sort of like it's what our time is so redesigned by. We know so much fact. I mean, are things worse now than ever before? I mean, on a certain level, obviously, the things that can be done to the physical planet are worse than have ever been done, and that is measurable progress. But in terms of, like, you know, in America, you know, black citizens being shot by cops of all colors, you know, it's sort of like, is that lynching is not new in America, but we have so much access to it, you know, and I think it's in the same way that, like, people a few years ago were starting to have unplugged events and very consciously have gatherings at which we're not recording, we're simply being present and hearing art and hearing music that was just happening in the, you know, in the room that we're in, and really recognizing the importance of being analog, you know, and just simply being here. I think that, like, you have to figure out, everybody has to figure out their own design for how to bear political oppression and political necessity, and how to take action and how to take care of yourself, you know, and arise again, you know, because there's no room for exhaustion as a state, you know. It's like, so I think each one of us has to figure out how we work our energy and who we work with, and what rooms, and even when you it's as important to shut up as it is to speak, you know, and when to save my energy and which battles to have, you know. So I think it's very complicated, and I think those designs are things that we really need to talk about and share, you know.
My very last question, to go back to the very beginning when I fucked up the pronoun to use for you, the non-binary pronouns, the they. As a writer whose material are words, I was thinking about, would you go back to a novel like Chelsea Girls and rewrite it with other pronouns?
No, but it's so weird. It's so weird to like just to see, you know, it's just like, yeah, it's really weird to read. Yeah, it's just simply weird to read poems that I wrote, you know, like several years ago, or a novel that I wrote, you know, 30 years ago, but it's weird in several ways, both in, you know, and the constancy of the female pronoun. I didn't use anything else, and then I do. I mean, that all my work is actually really pretty trans in its way, and I think it's expressed constantly, and there was less of a discourse around it for myself and in any community too. So it's like my work is surprising, but I don't believe, I'm not sure. I mean, like even in my recent book of poems, I dedicated a poem to a man who then transitioned, and I asked her if you know, if she wanted the name changed, and she said no, and so I didn't change the name. And I think I knew the answer, and I didn't need to ask. I should have changed the name, you know, because that was somebody else, not me, you know. But I just really believe in the knowing of the present, you know. And I think that like the work that I wrote when I was using she as a pronoun is it's just like it's part of the sound system, and it's a part of the reality, and it's part of the truth, and it would just be like, it just wouldn't make sense. You know, the whole rest of the story would change if the pronoun changed it, because it is that weighty. You know, I feel like I'm more concerned in terms of pronouns with what I do on the airplane, what I do at Starbucks, what I do. I mean, it's just like every I mean, like, and even, you know, like, and it's complicated by age. It's sort of like somebody will say, ma'am, and I just fucking want to punch them, you know? And it's just like, I just feel, and it's so weird. It's like, do I sound crotchety and weird if I say, you know what? Don't call me, you know, it's like they say, you know, don't call me ma'am. They say, well, would you like mademoiselle? And suddenly we're having an age joke. And I was like, fuck you, you know? And it's just like, it's so, the violation of that is starting to become more and more monstrous to me. Like, why in the world is it appropriate when I get on a plane or when I get a cup of coffee for you to tell me what genitals do you think I have and how old do you think I am, and whether I'm owned or not? You know, and you know, it's just like, it's really monstrous what is done to, you know. And I just, you know, I am who I am, and it's just like you know, and I both get read as male and female continually all day long, whether my hair is short or long. It changes all the time, and I think that's accurate, because I feel like in some way that's who I am too. But I still don't want somebody else deciding. And so it's just like, I don't know what to do with that. That's the writing problem I have. And I don't know the right words, and I keep trying to change that to find the right dialogue to meet that moment, you know.
Are there questions from the audience? Please raise your hands, and there is one over there.
Hi.
My dear colleague will hand you a microphone.
Hi, dear. Maybe just like to, like, the void is still there. Like, can you tell me what are you writing currently, or maybe recommend me a book like to fill the void, like something like that? Thank you.
Oh, well, I think everybody should read Andrea Lawler's Paul Takes the Body of a Mortal Girl. Do you know this novel? It's really amazing. It's the character is not trans, is a changeling. And so it's somebody who's always having, you know, sexual responses to other people, and determining, based on who that person is and who they've experienced themselves to be, they just sort of go into the bathroom and jerk off and create another set of genitals, and then go out and have a, you know, and it's amazing, and it's culturally perfect, you know, the music and the clothes and the moment and the and it's just like the writing is so good. I love this book. It's really incredible. And I'm working on a novel that I keep changing my mind about whether to talk about it or not. But it's about relationships, and my one desire, well, not my one desire. My one desire is for it to be good, but it's a monster. I want to write a 1,000-page book, you know, because I just feel like there's just got to be a pushback to all this kind of male genius, you know. And so I want to write this kind of genius book, big ass, you know, and I want to write it fast, because I just feel like I don't have 14 years to write a novel, or even 5, you know. So I'm trying to clear the deck and write that book, and that's fun. Yeah. That was it. We actually have 5 minutes.
We still have.
That yay was very summative, but I think.
Yeah, I mean, we could end it here on that note, but there is a question? No, that's just a high five for us? Oh, 5 minutes, okay.
Hi, 5 minutes. Yeah.
That's awkward, but hey. Are there more questions from you guys or comments? You can just tell Eileen Myers how much you like her, how much they have inspired her.
I'm not just going to tell you how much I like you.
I'm sorry, could you?
I'm not just going to tell you how much I like you, because you were saying that was what I might do. But yeah, what would you say? Because things have gone forward and things have gone backwards, kind of politically, and it's a constant sway. But what would you say that you've done to kind of or what have you found helpful in terms of approaching this kind of levels of fatigue and getting yourself back up again and sort of inspired? Like, what have been the things for you that have kept you going, sort of in terms of activism and feeling, I guess, as positive as you can feel?
We're talking about politics?
Yes, we're talking about politics, and yeah, just sort of when things have got tough for you over the years, what have been the things that have bounced you back again, if that makes sense?
I mean, I just think that every gathering is a political gathering, you know, and I think that's really exciting to understand how political art is, you know, and obviously we don't have to only stay in a art space and, you know, make art in political spaces and figure out how to make your work be political. And I think it's, you know, and I think it's, you know, just knowledge and information. I think all of us need to learn more constantly and look at how we treat. I think just on a certain basic level, I feel like I'm just trying so hard not to be rude. You know, I mean, I just feel like it's just like to not be harsh. You know, there's a way in which it's sort of like the violence starts here. You know, and it's just like there's so many things I can't control, and I feel like I can kind of try to figure out how to be gentler with the people in my life and with myself, you know, and it's sort of, again, I really think that the figuring out how to marshal your own energy, you know, and to support, you know, I've been thinking about women lately in this very, you know, broad way, because I had like a weird little accident. I mean, I was just like running to get a ferry in Massachusetts, and I stumbled and I fell down and my glasses went flying and I hurt my back and I just cut my hand and I got on the boat, you know, but I was like on the boat and I was like, you know, I travel all the time, so I'm always carrying Band-Aids and shit. So I was like, you know, in the cafe putting Band-Aids on, and I was just like, this woman was watching me and she was just like, you know, they have first aid here. You know, and I was like, oh, I'm okay. I got some Band-Aids, you know, and it was very sweet. And then a few minutes later, I realized that I don't know, I had like a headache. It was, you know, and then I was like, did you have any ibuprofen? And she goes, no, I don't. And there's another woman over there, and she's, I've got some, you know. And she starts taking it, and it was this whole like caring moment where I just felt I felt so seen, you know, and I thought it was so, and it was so like female in this way that people, that even as somebody who's born female, I'm always like, why am I such a caretaker? Why am I so, you know, and negating those qualities? And I feel like culturally, it's like, in so many ways, we're here because of, you know, like this training that women have been given to take care of people, you know, is so like, oh, I want to stop that and get more like, you know, and it's just like, it's this amazing force that everybody has to take on in this broader way to really like start from the ground up with the politics that you want, you know, and that obviously caring isn't just women's work, but it's everybody's work, and to figure out how to do more, you know, and to make it just be possible to live through this time, because it will change. Though, I mean, I think I believe when people say that the planet will survive, but we might not, you know. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just a daunting thought that we may be a species who are just eradicating ourselves, and it's very hard to look at that and think about that. But I just still think that it breaks down into micro moments where you just have to be really fucking kind, you know, and figure out what that means.
We were actually out of time, but maybe a quick question, yeah? There and there. Okay, let's take these two. Okay. Making it
and I'll give really quick answers.
Yeah.
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 Hi, thank you very much. I'm not sure my question will be so quick, so you can just dismiss it. I'm a sociologist, and I look at sociology of emotions and relationships. And I'm, together with other colleagues, observing a trend that younger people don't really want to have sex anymore. They seem to be afraid of sex. They don't really want relationships. They talk a lot about loneliness. And I, as a sociologist, am being asked all the time, what the hell is going on? I don't find explanation for this. Maybe you have. do you have a message? Do you have a message for millennials? How to make sex great again? Thank you very much.
Do I have a message for millennials?
What's your advice for millennials how to make sex great again? Quick answer.
Oh, I don't know. I think I think every meeting in actual real spaces like provokes really good sexual. I mean, I just think it's like getting sexual signals from people who are actually there, as opposed to ones. I mean, I think trying to meet people outside of computers would be really great, you know, and being braver about even just telling people who you're attracted to without having to do something. I think building it up through language is really hot, and I think writing about sex. And sharing it would be great. Writing diaries and showing them to other people, you know, sharing your sexual thoughts, I think is really important, you know, because they're viral, you know, and sexual writing is viral. And there was another.
I'm getting signs we have to close, but I said you could ask your question, make it very quick. What's the message on your t-shirt? Thank you.
Oh, isn't it Cloud Appreciation Society of West Texas? You know, and it's just like, it's sort of a real group that sort of just became a t-shirt in a way. I think it was, I live in New York and I live in West Texas in Marfa, and it has a big sky and it's really awesome. And so it's just like at the Marfa Book Company, which is really one of the great bookstores of the world, you know, actually just a group of dudes that decided they were the Marfa, you know, Cloud Appreciation Society, and there was sort of a joke, but I think they did real cloud walks and stuff, and then they made a t-shirt, and now the t-shirt has outlived them and stuff, and it's my favorite t-shirt. I can't tell you how dirty this t-shirt is. I just want to wear it day after day after day and, you know, advertise this club. Thank you so much.
There will be a book signing. There will be a book signing at the cafe. You all have to leave this place, unfortunately, quite quickly. Thank you for coming out. Eileen Myles, be quick with your epic novel. Come back next year, and this book will be translated as the first one of all of Eileen Myles' books in German. Thank you so much, Eileen Myles.